friends. So I'll be talking about this very important topic, prevention of ventilatory associated pneumonia. So I'll be only talking about the preventative measures that one needs to adopt to prevent the pneumonia. So it's a extremely important topic and quite useful for all infection control practices that needs to be incorporated in ICU in specific to preventing the pneumonia. So what would be the topics I would be covering is what's the definition of VAP and what are the distinctive risk factors for the VAP and the general. So the strategies can be divided into four categories. One is the general strategies of prevention. Second one would be to taking steps to prevent the aspiration. And third one would be to strategies to minimize colonization of aerodigestive, because the aerodigestive tract, if it gets colonized and these colonizers get into the respiratory tract and cause VAP eventually. And fourth is to keep the equipment clean. So strategies to minimize contamination of equipment, which are used in mechanical ventilation. And there are quite a few trials done to show different modalities which could be used to reduce VAP. So we look into whether they hold any promise. And then we'll come to the summary and take home message. So what's the definition of VAP? I'm sure most listeners would be aware. So this is reasonably basic topic, but it's very important to have clarity about this. So any pneumonia that develops in a patient who is mechanically ventilated for more than 48 hours constitute VAP. And the incidence of VAP varies between 10 to 25% in any intubated and mechanically ventilated patients. And this may vary based on the infection control practices, antibiotic stewardship, and the patient-nurse ratio also, which becomes terribly important. And the mortality when a VAP develops is 25 to 50%. So these are some of the general figures that one has to keep in mind. So what are the risk factors of VAP? So any patient who is in ICU, who is connected to a ventilator, would be having a lot of interventions. So I've just put it in a very pictorial way for you to try and remember what are the risk factors. There are about 14 risk factors. So one most important is duration of mechanical ventilation. So the longer the patient is on a ventilator, higher would be the risk of him or her developing VAP. And when there is a frequent change of the tubings that happen when patient is ventilated, that constitutes an important risk for VAP. And reintubation. So this is an extremely important thing. So the more number of times the patient gets reintubated, the greater is the risk of VAP. So it is extremely important when you're making assessment for extubation that all steps are taken to ensure to avoid reintubation that may happen, because that would significantly increase the risk of VAP. And obtended. So this is also very important. See, any patient who is obtended does carry the risk of developing VAP, which means to say the lower the GCS, higher is the risk of VAP. So, and you would have seen this typically in trauma, traumatic brain injury, or neurosurgical patients or stroke patients. When GCS is very low, the risk of VAP or secondary infections tend to be much higher than in patients where GCS is getting better. And supine position is definitive risk factor for developing VAP. And any patient who has colonized the aerodigestive tract is at a risk of VAP. And malnutrition is an important risk factor for VAP. Any patient who has undergone major surgeries, abdominal surgery, or any major surgical procedure is at a risk. Someone who has alcohol dependence on the background is an important risk factor for VAP. Someone who has an underlying lung disease or traumatic lung injury or any injury to the lung, so that becomes an nidus for infection and becomes a risk factor for developing VAP. Someone having end-stage liver failure or liver dysfunction, they are at a higher risk for VAP. Someone with an uncontrolled diabetes also constitutes an important risk factor for VAP. And someone with a CKD or acute kidney injury, or anyone who has a kidney dysfunction. So this also, they are also someone who is at a risk of developing VAP. So this is in a sense, just I put it in a pictorial format. So just remember this picture, you would remember all those 14 risk factors. And some of the drugs also constitute one of the important aspects. So someone who is getting indiscriminate antibiotics or who is on long-term corticosteroids, was on H2 blockers or deep sedation causing someone to be very obtended for a long time. So all these are important risk factors for VAP. So you can just remember this picture which would really help you to recall all the risk factors for VAP. So what about the pathogenesis of VAP? So it has been found that someone who is intubated mechanical ventilated, after 48 hours, 75% of these patients who is intubated and mechanically ventilated do get colonized at the aerodigestive tract with some sort of an organisms. And if these organisms get aspirated into the lungs, and that is when they develop the VAP. So this is an important pathogenesis that happens. So basically someone gets intubated in 48 hours, they get colonized in the aerodigestive tract with colonizers, and these colonizers get into the respiratory tract and they pass, they transmigrate across the cuff into the lungs, and that would lead to development of VAP. And the second important pathogenic reason for developing VAP are the hand hygiene. So this is a very critical element, especially in our Indian situation, where patient-nurse ratio is not regimentally maintained, because it is very important when the nurse-patient ratio dwindles. So ideally, the quality benchmark for the nurse-patient ratio for intubated mechanical ventilator patient is 1:1. So there needs to be one nurse looking after that patient. But seldom this happens in many of the ICUs. And if you have one nurse looking after 2-3 ventilated patients, so that is a definitive reason of them developing VAP, because the hand hygiene gets compromised, and there is a very high possibility that the nurse would be taking the bugs from one patient and transmitting it to another and causing the VAP. So hand hygiene is a very, very important pathogenic factor for factor or a variable that is important for the pathogenesis of VAP. And all the drugs that you use in ICU, which alters the pH of the stomach, this also becomes an important factor. So especially the routine indiscriminate use of antacids. So at least we know now for sure there is no role for routine gut prophylaxis or stress ulcer prophylaxis. So this is something which all of us need to bear in mind. So indiscriminate usage of PPIs or antacids does alter the gut pH and puts them at an increased risk of developing VAP. And contamination of these equipments, if they're not sanitized well, if the tubings are not sanitized well, and if contamination of these is not looked into, so that is a definitive reason for pathogenesis for VAP. So now let's jump into what are all the strategies to prevent VAP. So this, I said, could be divided into four different dimensions. One dimension is the general approach or general steps that one would undertake to reduce VAP. And the second one would be to reduce the aspiration of the colonizers in the aerodigestive tract. And the third one would be to prevent contamination of all the equipments that are used in ventilated patients. So let's look into the general strategies. So the first important aspect is active surveillance for VAP. So one needs to have a high index of suspicion and adopt good infection control practices to take steps to prevent VAP. And there should be surveillance that should be happening and audits that should be happening in trying to ascertain the risk of the patients who would eventually develop VAP. And as I said, the hand hygiene becomes a singular important factor which should be emphasized in preventing VAP. And it is shown in any unit where a very good hand hygiene is maintained, the VAP rates can be significantly reduced up to 50%. And there are benchmarks, and maintaining good hand hygiene is a quality indicator. So the benchmark is 90% of the time, good hand hygiene has to be maintained amongst all the personnel who are taking care of ventilated patients. And how do you calculate this benchmark? Number of hand washes indicated complying with the protocol divided by number of hand washes indicated into 100. So this is a quality benchmark. It is a quality indicator. So 90% of the time there should be adherence to good hand hygiene. And this has shown to definitely reduce the risk of hospital-acquired infection and more so the ventilator-associated pneumonia. And use of NIV is also a quality indicator. So this is also an important aspect where and when possible, it is desirable that we try to tide away the respiratory failure with NIV if that is feasible, especially in patients with type 2 respiratory failure or mild to moderate hypoxemic respiratory failure, where they are not profoundly distressed. A trial of NIV rather than jumping into intubation can go a long way in reducing the occurrence of VAP. And this is the study we did in our hospital in 2011 to see how was the usage of NIV. And we found in respiratory, we used NIV for 40%, and in cardiology, we used for 27.0T. As I said, this is a structure indicator. The benchmark is 95% of the COPD patients who come with exacerbation, they should not be intubated. They should be given a trial of NIV before even you contemplate intubation, because many of them come out of good NIV ventilation and don't necessarily need intubation unless there is an absolute reason, clinical indication that you have to intubate them. So the bottom line is, any respiratory failure, give a trial of NIV and see if patient is going to get better, and then jump into intubation. This can go a long way in reducing the VAP rates in your ICU, and this is an important quality indicator. And the third important aspect is having a good weaning protocol. See, this is also a very important step to reduce the VAP, because once you have intubated and put them on mechanical ventilator, that is when your job starts or your task starts, that how quickly you can help the patient come out of the ventilator. So gone are the days you put them on ventilator, just allow them to be on ventilator for a long time. So maybe 24 hours you ventilate them. After that, there should be an attempt to start weaning the patient and have a weaning protocol in place. And having a weaning protocol and nurses sensitized to this weaning protocol has shown to significantly reduce the duration of mechanical ventilation. And this is also a quality indicator. As you see, the 55% of the patients who are on mechanical ventilator in your unit should be on a weaning protocol of some sort, and that is a quality indicator. So having a weaning protocol and initiating the weaning process as soon as the clinically indicated goes a long way in reducing the risk of VAP. And fourth important thing is the education. So obviously constant emphasis on educating the staff, educating the respiratory therapists, educating all the trainees involved in the care of ventilated patients to take these necessary steps or to adhere to certain modalities to reduce the risk of VAP goes a long way in reducing the occurrence of VAP. So we'll move to the second. So this first domain is all the general measures. So the second domain is the strategies that we need to adopt to prevent aspiration of these colonizers in the aerodigestive tract. So one of the simplest thing that we could adopt to reduce the risk of VAP is head end elevation. And I'm sure every listener would be knowing the acronym that we use in ICU called as FAST HUG. So FAST HUG, H stands for, H in HUG stands for head end elevation. And this is a simple modality which is shown to reduce the risk of aspiration and reduce the risk of VAP in the patients. And these have been demonstrated in the studies. And this is a quality indicator that we need to adopt in our hospital or in our ICU. And other measures that one would undertake to reduce the risk of aspiration is to maintaining the good cuff pressure of the ET tube, at least to more than 20 centimeter of water, so that you prevent the aspiration of aerodigestive colonizers across the cuff into the respiratory tract. So maintaining a good cuff pressure also goes a long way in reducing the risk of VAP. And another important way one would prevent aspiration is to absolutely have a meticulous approach in planning to extubate your patients and prevent self-extubation, because once patient who is not eligible for extubation has self-extubated or unplanned extubation, so then these are the patients who do aspirate and develop VAP or reintubation. So meticulous clinical evaluation of fulfillment of criteria for extubation goes a long way in preventing failure of extubation and needing to reintubate this patient, which significantly increases the risk of VAP. And taking measures to prevent gastric distension. You would have a sick patients or diabetic patients where there can be gastric distension, and steps have to be taken to prevent gastric distension, because distension of this would lead to increasing in the risk of aspiration and VAP. So self-extubation, as I said, taking steps to prevent self-extubation is an outcome indicator and it is a quality indicator. And the accepted benchmark is you cannot have more than 15 self-extubation per 1,000 intubation days, and that's the quality indicator. So in any unit, your sedation protocol should be in place to prevent self-extubation. More than 15 per 1,000 is that there is a breach in the quality, and more aggressive steps have to be taken to prevent self-extubation to reduce the occurrence of VAP. So that is the second domain. So the first domain is the general measures. Second domain is to steps taken to prevent the aspiration of aerodigestive tract, which is maintaining cuff pressure, avoiding self-extubation or unplanned extubation. So these go a long way in reducing the risk of aspiration and head and simple head and elevation. So the third domain or the third pillar is we would talk on strategies to reduce colonization. So the second one was to prevent aspiration of colonization. Third one is to strategies that we could adopt to reduce colonization of aerodigestive tract. So there are four strategies. So one is obviously one we all follow is orotracheal intubation is better than nasotracheal intubation. And I'm sure all of us adopt to this as a standard of care. The second one important thing is to keep the oral cavity clean by maintaining good oral hygiene by chlorhexidine rinses or oral decontamination. So this goes a long way in reducing the VAP, and there are studies which I'll take you through, and trying as much as possible to avoid routine usage of H2 blockers and proton pump inhibitors, because as I said, alteration in the pH leads to colonization of the aerodigestive tract and leading to VAP. So avoiding routine usage, which is a very, very arduous and difficult task for all the trainees to reconcile, that there is really no need to routinely give this stress ulcer prophylaxis, can go a long way in reducing the risk of VAP. And selective oral decontamination or selective digestive decontamination are some of the modalities one could consider in high risk patient to reduce the risk of VAP. So let us look into whether there is any evidence for this. So this was a good study, which is a meta-analysis which came from Singapore in 2007. So meta-analysis of 11 randomized controlled trials of 3,242 patients. So they compared a group which got selective oral decontamination versus placebo. And it was found that the VAP rates were significantly less in the group which had got oral decontamination done or oral sanitization that happened. But this did not have any bearing on the mortality difference between these two groups. So this was another study by the Dutch group by the Netherlands. Large study, 5,939 patients. Selective oral decontamination group had 1,904 patients. STD, digestive decontamination, had 2,045, and standard. So the drugs they used for selective digestive decontamination was a paste of tobramycin, colistin, and amphotericin B. And 28-day mortality they looked at, so there was no difference between any of these. But they found the death risk, absolute death risk, was reduced by 2.9% as compared to standard in SOD, selective oral decontamination. It reduced by 3.5% in STD. So these studies really tell us that there are some signals to say that sanitizing and sterilizing and decontaminating the oral cavity with some appropriate measures, be it oral decontamination, on later evidence came to stress or emphasize on chlorhexidine oral rinses, which goes a long way in keeping the oral cavity clean and reduce the risk of VAP. So this was again another study by the Dutch group, which looked into 5,939 patients, and they compared between SOD and STD, and they looked into the sepsis at the 3 days. And as you see, at the third day, the risk of sepsis was significantly less in the group which had got SOD and STD as compared to the standard. And the MDR organisms also were found to be less in STD group. And respiratory colonization was 10% in SOD, 8 in STD, and 15. So there were signals towards less of respiratory colonization in patients who underwent this selective oral decontamination or digestive decontamination. And even the risk of sepsis at day 3 was significantly less in SOD and STD group. So this Dutch study and the Singapore meta-analysis really point towards some benefit in keeping the oral cavity clean in using some sort of a decontamination in reducing the risk of VAP. So now after this SOD and STD, so the newer studies looked at the role of chlorhexidine. So this was the biggest study that came from Belgian group, which took 14 studies with 2,481 patients. They took 12 studies where they used chlorhexidine to sanitize the oral cavity or decontaminate the oral cavity with 2,341 patients. And there were 2 studies which looked at povidone iodine with 140. So there were a large series of patients predominantly who got chlorhexidine as a modality to decontaminate the oral cavity. And this was the result. So when they took all the studies with chlorhexidine and povidone, the risk of VAP was significantly reduced in the group which had got chlorhexidine or povidone, and that was statistically significant as compared to the standard group. But when they stratified the study only to chlorhexidine, it was again very significant. But when they only looked at two studies, povidone iodine, and saw whether it really reduced the risk of VAP, it failed to show any benefit in reducing the risk of VAP. So basically, this study emphasizes that chlorhexidine is a superior sort of a agent to reduce the risk of VAP and effectively decontaminates the oral cavity. So now we have adhered to this practice rather than selective oral decontamination with any other antibiotic or tobramycin and colistin paste, as opposed to simple chlorhexidine oral rinses as a very good measure to reduce the risk of VAP. So the conclusions they made from this study, which has been adopted as one of the standard VAP bundle, is to use this chlorhexidine oral rinses has found to be beneficial in reducing the risk of VAP. And the recommended sort of dosages, it has to be used at least 8 to 12 hourly, 0.12%, 15 ml, 12 hourly. So that is the sort of a dosage that one should consider using this. So this is a very simple thing which should be adopted in practice to reduce the patient's risk of developing VAP. So now we look into other modalities like subglottic drainage. So again, this is a modality to reduce the risk of aspiration of aerodigestive colonizers. So subglottic drainage, so basically you have a suction port just above the cuff so that all the secretions above the endotracheal cuff is continuously aspirated so that there is no aspiration of these secretions that pool above the cuff. So that is the whole concept. And this also has been adopted as one of the reasonably good standard of care, at least in long-term ventilated patients. So this was a Canadian meta-analysis by Muscadire. 13 randomized controlled trials they looked with 2,442 patients who underwent subglottic drainage. And they found the risk of VAP was significantly reduced in patients who got subglottic drainage. ICU length of stay was reduced by 1.52 days. The duration of mechanical ventilation was reduced by 1.08 days. And there was increased duration that was needed for development of first VAP by 2.66 days as opposed to the group which did not get subglottic drainage. And ICU and hospital length of stay, there was no effect. So all in all, so this is the biggest meta-analysis taking into 13 randomized with subglottic drainage and shows that there is some merit in using subglottic drainage to reduce the risk of VAP. More so in our country where the patient nursing ratio suffers, it becomes imperative that we could adopt to using this subglottic drainage as one of the simple measure, because the cost difference of these CT tubes with the subglottic drainage may not be very high as opposed to the standard ones. So it is reasonable for us to adopt this practice to reduce our patients' risk for VAPs, especially where patients would be intubated for a little longer time. And now they looked at the other innovation where they used silver coated ET tube. And this was a nascent study that came from US, published in JAMA by Colef Group. So they had 2003 patients randomized between silver coated tube and non-silver. And they found the VAP rates were significantly less in silver coated tube. And the silver coated tube, there was a delay in the development of VAP. Duration of mechanical ventilation mortality, there was no difference between silver coated and non-silver coated. ICU and hospital mortality, no difference. VAP mortality, as you see, appeared to be less in silver coated, but the non-VAP mortality was found to be higher in silver coated. So all in all, again, signals pointing out that silver coated tube may have some role in reducing the risk of VAP. But as you see, the non-VAP mortality also was higher in silver coated. So that raised certain apprehensions in people, and this innovation somehow has not been adopted as a routine standard of care. Maybe the cost would be one factor, and the finding of having non-VAP mortality being higher also may have raised concerns of using this silver coated. But between these subglottic and silver coated, so there has been more wider acceptance of using subglottic drainage in reducing the VAP as opposed to the silver coated. So then we'll move to how about adopting this VAP bundle. So this is the typical VAP bundle that we have in our hospital. And this is a process indicator. Every ICU which claims to be running a good standard of care processes should have this VAP bundle within their unit, because this is a process indicator, and having this VAP bundle has shown to significantly reduce the risk of VAP. And these are simple things which a nurse has to jot down during every shift change, whether the patient's head end is elevated, whether regular oral care with chlorhexidine is given, whether continuous subglottic suctioning is happening, and using the closed ET suctioning rather than having an open method. So all these simple things, you can add in any other tools that may be needed, but some sort of a checklist that a nurse ticks off in every shift goes a long way in reducing the risk of VAP. And the accepted benchmark, the global benchmark for VAP rates is 18 VAPs one could have in 1,000 mechanical ventilation. So these are all the set benchmarks, globally, that one could accept. And if your VAP rates are exceeding this, then stringent measures have to be put in place, and corrective and preventive measures has to be put in place to reduce the risk of VAP. And by adopting these VAP bundles, this was a study by the French group which showed by by strictly adhering to the VAP bundles, the VAP rates was reduced from 23 to 13 per 1,000 ventilated days in their particular study, which came in 2010. So again, studies indicate that having VAP bundles and adhering to this in a regimental way can go a long way in reducing the VAP rates. So let's move into the last domain, which is the measures or strategies that one would undertake to reduce contamination of equipment, in equipment that is used in ventilated patients. So it is terribly, terribly important to use sterile water for rinsing any of the equipment that you are using for a ventilated patients, and surface cleaning of the ventilators and all the other equipments that are attached to the patients go a long way in reducing the risk of VAP. And if the tubings appear soiled, or if there is a lot of soiling or mucus or any staining that has happened, so it is imperative that these tubings have to be changed and not to be continued that way. And very often, this is a simple thing one could undertake. We see very often, I'm sure many listeners would agree, when you're doing around, you would see water accumulated in the tubings, which we call as a condensate. And these condensates have to be removed. If you leave the condensate there, it becomes a good sort of a medium for the bacteria to grow and for the development of VAP. So it is very important nurses are trained that there is no accumulation of condensate and water accumulation in any part of the tubing. And this has to be cleaned in a regular way and kept in a dry sort of a situation, because having any condensate anywhere becomes a nidus for the bacteria. So these are simple measures that one should: sterile water and changing the tubes when they're soiled, and surface cleaning of the equipment that are connected in a ventilated patient, and regular removal of condensate goes a long way in reducing the risk of VAP. So those are the four domains. So one is the general measures, and one is prevention of aspiration of the aerodigestive commensals or colonizers. And the third one is to prevent aerodigestive colonization. And the fourth one is measures that are undertaken to decontaminate the equipment connected to the patient in a ventilated patient. So then there are certain unproven strategies that have been tried. So the probiotics. So this was there was a big sort of a move towards using probiotics as one of the tool or one of the measure in reducing the risk of VAP. So here, this was a study that came in 2010 by US group, 146 mechanical ventilated patients. They were randomized in one group who got probiotics, the other one got placebo. They looked at Clostridium difficile infection, and it was found to be significantly less in the group which got probiotics as compared to the placebo. And the VAP rates also were found to be significantly less in the group which got probiotics, 19% versus 40%. And the duration of antibiotics also was found to be less in probiotics. So this particular study raised the enthusiasm that maybe probiotics would help overall in patients in reducing the risk. But then the study was grossly underpowered to make any strong conclusions And right now, there is no robust evidence to say that routine use of probiotics helps us in any way in reducing the VAP. So this was a very interesting study which we discussed some time ago, which came in trauma patient called Hippolyte study. So this was a polytrauma patients who got corticosteroids. So this was 150 patients with polytrauma, 73 got corticosteroids and 76 placebo. This study showed use of corticosteroids in polytrauma patients reduced the risk of them developing VAP. It was 35.6% as compared to 51.3. That was statistically significant. And mechanical ventilator free days also was higher, which is a good thing in corticosteroid, which means the duration of ventilation was less in corticosteroid. And mortality, they did not find difference. Again, this raised some sort of a excitement that in polytrauma patients, the use of corticosteroids, especially when they're hypotensive, if you have to subscribe to this study, appeared to have reduced the VAP, but obviously we cannot make any take-home conclusion based on one small study. Um, in polytrauma patients. So these are two sort of offbeat study. One was with probiotics, one was using corticosteroids in polytrauma patients, and where it was shown the risk of VAP was low. So all in all, summary, as the topic is only prevention. So the first important step is to do active surveillance. So actively look out for patients who may be developing VAP and identify them and taking corrective and preventive measures. And can't emphasize and emphasize and emphasize on hand hygiene. It goes a long way. Simple technique can go a long way in reducing the risk of VAP by 50%. And this is a benchmark, and there should be 90% adherence to a good hand hygiene in any good ICU. And always consider using NIV as a first tool in respiratory failure before you jump into intubate. So the more NIV you use, so there may be a lot of patients who may be benefiting and who may be where you may be minimizing the risk of them developing VAP. And having a good weaning protocol in place reduces the duration of mechanical ventilation, thereby reducing the risk of them developing VAP. And constant educational activities that should be happening for all the nurses, respiratory technicians, and the trainees who are caring for ventilated patients has been shown to go a long way in reducing the risk of VAP. So the second domain is what we looked is to strategies to prevent aspiration. So there are four methods that one could adopt to reduce the risk of aspiration. One is maintaining the good cuff pressure. Second one is a simple head end elevation, which goes a long way. Simple techniques, and this is a quality indicator. It goes on to reduce the VAP. And unplanned extubation or reintubation can go a long way. And the fourth one is to prevent gastric distension by using prokinetics can also go a long way. So those four simple things: head end elevation, cuff pressure, unplanned extubation, reintubation to be avoided, and gastric distension can go a long way. So the third pillar, so there are four pillars: general measures, prevention of aspiration, and third pillar is preventing the colonization of the aerodigestive tract, and orotracheal intubation is the way to go, which we all adhere to. And the second one is to try and avoid using H2 blockers or routine stress ulcer prophylaxis that can go a long way in reducing the risk of VAP, and having some measure to sanitize and decontaminate the oral cavity by selective oral decontamination or STD in a high risk patient, and keeping the oral cavity clean can go a long way in reducing the risk of VAP. And the fourth pillar is preventing the contamination or decontamination of all the equipments that are used, using sterile water and changing the tube when they're soiled, surface cleaning of the ventilator, and removal of condensate. So thank you very much. So as many would you know that I am a medical philatelist. So this was a stamp in Nepal, released by Nepal. It was released in 2011, again to commemorate how important is hand hygiene, and it portrays the importance of hand hygiene on a stamp. So I would end my talk with this beautiful quote: "A lie doesn't become truth, wrong doesn't become right, and evil doesn't become good just because it's accepted by majority." So thank you all. So you can visit my website www.drpradeeprangappa.com to rehear to this lecture. So it's a very important topic for all the trainees, and keep on revising these four important domains in preventing VAP. So again, it is the general measures and preventing the aspiration of aerodigestive tract, and prevention of colonization of the aerodigestive tract, and the fourth one is decontamination of all the equipments. So thank you all.